Have you ever noticed that the longer you're alone, the harder it becomes to be around people again? At first, you enjoy the silence. No pressure, no expectations, no conversations. It feels peaceful, even comforting. Then, something begins to change. The phone rings. You don't answer. A friend sends a message. You tell yourself, I'll reply later. Days become weeks. Weeks become months. Without realizing it, the outside world slowly begins to disappear. And strangely, the longer you're isolated, the less you want to leave. Why? Because social isolation doesn't simply change your lifestyle. It changes your brain. It quietly reshapes the way you think, the way you feel, the way you see yourself, and even the way you see other people. The frightening part is, most people don't notice it happening until one day, they no longer recognize the person they've become. Your brain was never designed to be alone. Human beings often describe themselves as independent. We celebrate phrases like, I don't need anyone. I work better alone. I prefer my own company. And sometimes, those statements are true. Solitude can be beautiful. It gives us space to think, to reflect, to grow. History is filled with philosophers, artists, scientists, who produced extraordinary ideas while spending long periods alone. But solitude and isolation are not the same thing. Solitude is a choice. Isolation is a condition. One restores your energy. The other slowly drains it. Your brain doesn't simply enjoy connection. It was built around it. Long before cities, before smartphones, before civilization, survival depended on belonging to a tribe. If you were separated, you became vulnerable. Your brain learned something very important. Being alone could mean danger. Thousands of years later, your brain still carries that ancient programming, which is why prolonged isolation often creates emotional pain, not because you're weak, but because your mind interprets disconnection as a warning signal. Loneliness isn't just an emotion, it's your brain's way of saying, something important is missing. When silence becomes normal, here's something fascinating. The first few days of isolation can actually feel relaxing. No social pressure, no awkward conversations, no expectations. For people who feel overwhelmed, isolation may even feel like healing. But then, the silence begins to change. Instead of becoming peaceful, it becomes familiar. Your routine shrinks. You stop going outside as much. You stop answering messages. You convince yourself, I'll reconnect later. But later keeps moving further away. Without realizing it, your comfort zone becomes your prison. Not because the world became more frightening, but because your brain quietly adapted to avoiding it. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as an avoidance cycle. The more situations you avoid, the less familiar they become. And the less familiar they become, the more difficult they feel. Eventually, even simple conversations can feel exhausting, not because you've forgotten how to speak, but because your brain has become unfamiliar with connection. Isolation feeds itself. The less connected you feel, the less motivated you become to reconnect. And the cycle continues. When your mind becomes your only companion, there comes a point when isolation stops feeling like something happening around you and starts happening inside you. Because when there are fewer conversations with other people, your brain replaces them with conversations with yourself. At first, that might sound harmless. Everyone has an inner voice. It helps you reflect, solve problems, imagine the future, learn from the past. But your inner voice was never meant to become your only voice. Without other people challenging your thoughts, your mind slowly becomes an echo chamber. The same worries repeat. The same fears grow louder. The same memories replay over and over again. A small mistake from years ago suddenly feels impossible to forget. A simple awkward conversation becomes proof that people don't like you. A rejection starts to feel like your identity instead of an experience. Not because these thoughts are true, but because there is nothing interrupting them. Sometimes, the greatest danger of isolation isn't silence. It's that your own thoughts become the loudest thing you hear. And over time, if every conversation happens only inside your head, your mind slowly begins to mistake imagination for reality. Why loneliness makes the world feel more threatening. Have you ever noticed That after staying away from people for a long time, even small social situations feel strangely exhausting? Walking into a room full of strangers, making a phone call, starting a conversation. Things that once felt ordinary now feel overwhelming. This isn't because you've become weak. Your brain is trying to protect you. When people experience prolonged isolation, the brain often becomes more alert to signs of rejection or danger. You begin reading between the lines. A delayed reply feels personal. A neutral facial expression feels cold. Silence feels like disapproval. The mind starts filling in blanks, usually with the worst possible explanation. Maybe you've caught yourself thinking, they probably don't want me there. I'd only make things awkward. No one really cares. These thoughts can feel convincing, but feelings aren't always facts. The brain, shaped by isolation, often becomes hypervigilant. It scans for threats, even when there aren't any. This is one of isolation's quietest tricks. It doesn't just separate you from other people. It changes how you interpret them. When you stop feeling like yourself. One of the saddest effects of prolonged isolation isn't loneliness, it's forgetting who you are. Think about it. So much of your identity develops through interaction. A friend's laughter reminds you that you're funny. A meaningful conversation reminds you that your ideas matter. Helping someone reminds you that you have something valuable to offer. Relationships act like mirrors, not because they define you, but because they reflect parts of you that are difficult to see alone. When those mirrors disappear, something strange happens. You begin questioning yourself. Am I interesting anymore? Do I even know how to talk to people? Have I changed? Sometimes. You haven't changed nearly as much as you think. You've simply lost the reminders of who you've always been. Isolation has a way of shrinking your world. Not all at once, but little by little. The places you go become fewer. The conversations become shorter. The dreams become quieter. Until one day, life feels smaller than it used to. Not because the world became smaller, but because your world did. And perhaps the most heartbreaking part is that many people begin believing this smaller life is all they'll ever have. Transition. But here's the truth. The human brain is remarkably adaptable. The same brain that learned isolation can also learn connection again. It won't happen overnight, and it won't happen by pretending everything is fine. But healing is possible. The question isn't whether your mind can recover. The question is, how do you begin finding your way back? After you've spent so long walking alone? The way back is smaller than you think. If you've been isolated for a long time, you might believe that the only way to fix it is to completely change your life overnight. Meet new people, go to crowded places, become outgoing, say yes to everything. But your brain doesn't heal through sudden transformation. It heals through repeated experiences that teach it, you are safe. Imagine someone who has spent years inside a dark room. You wouldn't drag them into the brightest sunlight all at once. Their eyes wouldn't be ready. Instead, you'd slowly open the curtains. The same is true for your mind. Healing from isolation isn't about forcing yourself to become someone else. It's about gently reminding your brain that connection is no longer something to fear. Maybe it begins with replying to one message you've been avoiding. Maybe it's a short conversation with a neighbor. Maybe it's calling someone you trust. Even if you don't know what to say, small steps often feel insignificant. But psychologically, they're powerful. Because every healthy interaction quietly tells your brain, the world isn't as dangerous as I imagined. And little by little, your confidence begins to return. Not all at once, but one conversation at a time. Learning to be alone, without being lonely. Here's something philosophy has understood for centuries. Being alone is not the enemy. Some of life's deepest insights are discovered in silence. Many great thinkers sought solitude, not to escape people but to better understand themselves. The problem begins when solitude becomes isolation, when silence turns into disconnection, when peace slowly becomes emotional distance. There is a difference. Healthy solitude says, I'm choosing this moment. Isolation whispers, no one would notice if I disappeared. One nourishes your mind. The other quietly starves it. Real wisdom isn't choosing one over the other. It's learning when you need reflection, and when you need connection. Life was never meant to be lived at one extreme. Too much noise, and you lose yourself. Too much silence, and you begin forgetting that other people can help you find yourself again. Balance, not perfection, is what keeps the mind healthy. People who save us often don't realize they did. Think about someone who once changed your day, without even knowing it. Maybe they smiled at you, asked how you were doing, invited you somewhere, stayed a little longer to listen. They probably forgot that moment, but you didn't. Human connection doesn't always arrive in dramatic ways. Sometimes, it's ordinary. A conversation, a laugh, a simple reminder that someone sees you. Isolation convinces you that people don't care. Connection quietly proves otherwise. That's why one genuine relationship can begin healing wounds that years of isolation created. Not because another person completes you, but because healthy relationships remind you of parts of yourself that loneliness made you forget. Final reflection. Maybe the greatest danger of social isolation isn't that you spend time alone. It's that, little by little, you begin believing you were meant to be. And that's the lie. You were never designed to carry every thought alone. You were never meant to fight every battle in silence. You were never meant to convince yourself that needing people is weakness. Because it isn't. Strength isn't pretending you don't need connection. Strength is having the courage to reach for it again. Even after disappointment. Even after rejection. Even after loneliness has convinced you to stop trying. If you've been isolated for a long time, don't measure your healing by how many friends you have tomorrow. Measure it by one honest conversation, one walk outside, one message answered, one small step toward the world again. Because healing rarely arrives all at once. It arrives quietly, the same way isolation did. One moment at a time. And perhaps the most beautiful truth is this: the world you slowly disappeared from may still be waiting for you. Not because life paused while you were gone, but because every new day gives you another chance to begin again. Maybe that's what hope really is. Not believing yesterday never happened, but believing tomorrow doesn't have to look the same. So, if today feels lonely, don't ask yourself, how do I rebuild my entire life? Ask yourself, what's one small step I can take today that tomorrow's version of me will be grateful for? Sometimes, one step is enough to change the direction of a life. If this video helped you understand something about yourself, don't let that understanding end here. There are millions of people silently carrying questions they don't know how to ask. If you're one of them, you're in the right place. Subscribe to this channel, where every video explores the hidden psychology behind the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that shape our lives. And I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a period of social isolation? What was the hardest part, and what helped you find your way back? Share your thoughts in the comments. Someone reading your story might realize they're not as alone as they thought. If this video resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone who may need to hear it today. Until next time, protect your mind, question your thoughts, never stop trying to understand yourself. This is ABFA Mind. Think like a philosopher, understand like a psychologist,